Good morning to everybody. Thanks for coming. I am Eduardo Bertoni. I'm the director of the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law here at the Washington College of Law at American University. It's my pleasure to say something and give you the welcoming. Thanks for coming. The Center for Human Rights was founded more than 30 years ago. Our main mission is to work with students here at the law school that are interested in international law and particularly in human rights. Usually we organize this or co-organize these kind of events. We also have a research program. I'm not going to talk a lot about the center. We distributed our last annual report, so you can see what the center have been doing in a printed fashion. Let me say that the armed conflict with Sudan caused since April 2023 one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Today, our great panel will discuss and will facilitate an exchange of views between victims, human rights defenders, experts, practitioners, scholars, on the actions that may be suitable and effective in bringing an end to immense suffering of people of Sudan, including those living in the region of Darfur. Finally, our goal is also to raise the level of attention among policymakers and relevant stakeholders to promote peace, justice, and respect for the fundamental human rights of peoples of Sudan. I would like to thank my colleague, Susana Sakoto, the director of the War Crimes Research Office here at WCL, and my colleague and old friend, David Donat Kateng. They both will moderate the event. And I would like to also take the opportunity to say thank you to the co-sponsors of this event and to the panelists. The panelists will be introduced by the moderator, so I'm not going to introduce the panel now. But yes, I want to say thank you to the co-sponsors, not only the War Crimes Research Office, who in fact is the co-organizer with the Center for Human Rights of this event, but also to American Society of International Law, the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, the Darfur Women Action Group, and NYU Center for Global Affairs. If I am forgetting someone, I apologize in advance. So having said that, I hope that we are going to have a very vibrant discussion. For those who want more pizza, there are more pizza in the back. You can take there during our discussions, and I will pass the floor to the first moderator, Susana Sakoto. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Eduardo, for that warm introduction. Let me add my own welcome to all of you here in person and online. I think we have a group online joining us. As Eduardo said, I'm Susana Sakoto. I direct the War Crimes Research Office here at the law school, as well as our summer program in The Hague. I teach in this area of international criminal law. I have run a practicum on international criminal law and procedure. So this area is close to my heart, and I thank David for bringing this to us, this idea of hosting this panel here. I'm really pleased to be co-moderating the panel with David and to kick off this discussion with this incredible panel of speakers. I'm going to give you just a little bit about how we're going to proceed today, a few words about the structure, We're going to start off by asking Professor Juan Mendez to help us frame the conversation today by walking us through general legal obligations under international law to prevent and punish genocide. Then I'm going to turn the floor over to our other moderator, David, to turn to our Sudanese colleagues and other survivors of serious human rights violations so they can share some of their experiences and reflections with you. And then we will turn to our legal experts, Professors Rebecca Hamilton and Milena Stereo, to talk about what can and what should be done to respond to the situation in Sudan. And that will hopefully leave us some time for a brief second round of questions, and then to open up the floor to you for questions and for the panelists. Now, because we want to give our panel, there's a lot of us on the panel, and because we want to give them maximum time for their reflections, for their thoughts, we will introduce them only by their current role. But fear not, we have, I think Beatrice distributed their bios. You should have them in the room. They should also be online. You should read their full bios. They're very impressive people, and hopefully you'll get a chance to do that. Let me, in the interest of time, turn to Professor Juan Mendez, who's currently Professor of Human Rights Law in residence at AU's Washington College of Law, where he is faculty director of our Anti-Torture Initiative, a project of the center. Professor Mendez, the Rapid Support Forces have been engaged, as we know, in a brutal conflict with the Sudanese armed forces since April of 2023. According to human rights organizations documenting abuses during the conflict, the RSF has carried out widespread criminality, war crimes, crimes against humanity across Sudan, including targeted ethnic killing, systematic rape and sexual violence, and mass displacement in West Darfur. At the same time, there's been documentation of Sudanese armed forces, the SAF, that have resorted to indiscriminate aerial bombing, causing massive destruction and enormous suffering among civilian populations. Reports indicate that both the SAF and the RSF have employed starvation as a weapon of war. And the result is that we have more than 11 million people forced to flee, forced to leave their homes. Maybe over half of Sudan's population in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. Famine has obviously already been declared in some regions. It's spreading. In some, the conflict has led to one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. On January 7th of 2025, the Biden administration, in one of its last acts, determined that the Rapid Support Forces had committed genocide in Darfur during the current conflict in Sudan, and it sanctioned RSF commander Hamedi Dagalo for atrocities committed by his forces in Sudan, along with 7 RSF-linked companies. This, of course, is not the first genocide determination by the US regarding Sudan. 20 years ago, in 2004, then Secretary of State, Colin Powell made a similar genocide determination, urging the UN to respond accordingly. Professor Mendez, you have held a number of really important positions focused on the prevention of these crimes, including the prevention of genocide. The Honorable Kofi Annan named you as his special advisor on the prevention of genocide, a position you held from 2004 to 2007. And you were also an advisor on the crime prevention, to the former prosecutor of the ICC from 2009 to 2011. So I wanted to turn to you with a few questions. What effect does this determination have? What obligations does it impose on the US and on other state parties to the Genocide Convention? What is their obligation under international law to prevent and punish genocide? And does the convention, the Genocide Convention, impose liability on states once a genocide determination is made?
Well, thank you very much, Susanna. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the War Crimes Research Office and the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law and the other organizers for the privilege to participate in this panel. It also gives me the great pleasure of seeing my friend, Dr. David Donat-Kattan, again after, what, 20 years at least. But I have very fond memories of his contributions to prevention of genocide when I was, as you mentioned, Kofi Annan's special advisor on the prevention of genocide. And there and in my 2 years as advisor to the prosecutor of the ICC, I focus mostly on prevention, because generally in international law, international human rights law, and I think in international humanitarian law, we focus on events that have already happened. So we focus on accountability, and we focus on, if anything, to try to make the violations cease, but doing something so that they don't happen in the first place is relatively new and relatively untested. I visited Darfur twice in 2004 and 2005, and I wrote reports to the Security Council, to the Secretary General, and he submitted them to the Security Council at that time. And it's really disheartening, heartbreaking actually, to see the events unfolding all over again, maybe with slightly different actors. At the time, what is now the RSF and the government forces were acting together, and they were instrumentalizing the Janjaweed to commit very serious atrocities, in addition to the armed forces of Sudan. There were rebel forces also, and they probably committed some violations, but they were mostly not involved themselves in genocidal acts. The reason I went to Darfur had a lot to do with the determination that you mentioned was made by Secretary of State Colin Powell, first in the Senate here in Congress, in Washington, and then also before the Security Council, because I had been in office a couple of months, and I didn't get too many responses to my phone calls. And then all of a sudden with Secretary of State Powell saying, we think on the basis of the information that we have that what's going on in Darfur is genocide, it actually made everybody sit up and look and listen. And Sudan invited me to visit together with the then High Commissioner for Human Rights, Louise Arbor, and a delegation. And then we came back and we reported to the Security Council. And among some of the things that happened as a result of our visit was that in March of 2005, the Security Council referred the case of Darfur to the International Criminal Court. And that, as you know, resulted also in the arrest warrant for President al-Bashir at the time. That unfortunately, even today, although he's no longer in power, in fact, he's in custody, if I understand it correctly, it still hasn't been, affected. Much as I thank Secretary Powell for that determination that changed the outlook of the whole international community towards Darfur, I have to say that I was disappointed that in the next line he said, but that doesn't mean that we have to do anything about it. And maybe in terms, we went from President Clinton apologizing for not doing enough in Rwanda to saying, yes, this, and avoiding the word genocide in Rwanda, to Darfur and saying, yes, this is genocide, but then we don't have to do anything about it. And I have to say that the resolution of the Security Council went some ways into preventing genocide, but unfortunately did not resolve the situation as such. And that's why we see genocide happening all over again. And although my role was not to qualify situations as whether they amounted to genocide or not, I now that I'm no longer the the special advisor, I don't have any reluctance to say that what was going on and what is going on now is genocide according to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The convention does define genocide pretty clearly, and it also establishes the obligation to either prosecute or extradite. It does not establish the obligation to intervene, but I think in the 2000s, and especially after the tragedies of the Balkans War and Rwanda, we have developed a doctrine, at least, to consider the genocide obligations, but also the genocide. I mean, the obligations under the Geneva Conventions regarding war crimes, and the obligations under the category that we call crimes against humanity, to include not only a moral and a political obligation, but also even a legal obligation, at least from the international community as such, to respond to genocide, and to respond in the several different ways in which it is supposed to be responded, and particularly to emphasize prevention. I think in the case of Darfur in 2004, the international community succeeded partially in at least containing the problem. And after the Security Council acted, there are no very serious crimes as those committed throughout 2003 and 2004 that cost the lives of 300,000 and the displacement of, at that time, 2 million people. But we didn't do enough to allow the victim population to have agency, to protect themselves, to leave the camps and the complete dependence on international humanitarian assistance, and live lives of fulfillment. And so 20 years later, they are still displaced and still dependent on foreign assistance. And now they're dependent on the international community to protect them from genocide. And I believe the Security Council has an obligation. This is not only a moral obligation, but a legal obligation to respond to mass atrocities by the many ways in which it can respond. And I think we also, in 2005, the international community drafted this doctrine that we call responsibility to protect, and it's part of a General Assembly resolution that was adopted in the summit, the World Summit of 2005, and with the attendance of more than 100 heads of state and government. And so it is a kind of heightened quality of General Assembly resolution, and it does establish very clear steps that can and need to be taken to prevent genocide and mass atrocities more generally from happening. Unfortunately, we have not found yet the way of operationalizing responsibility to protect. But it does stand there as a guide to us, as a, if you will, a non-binding legal instrument that shows us the way to prevent mass atrocities from happening. And that should be a kind of a blueprint for what the Security Council has to do. And I would just finish by saying what I learned in Darfur, and I reported to the Security Council that in all cases like this one, we need to act in 4 different areas. One is protection. And if necessary, protection requires either civilian observers or even armed contingents that protect civilians and vulnerable populations from further harm. The second is humanitarian assistance, because the fact of displacement itself puts the situation in an obligation from the international community to prevent disease, to prevent hunger, and generally to educate children, to let these populations, not only survive but to thrive eventually. The third one is accountability, because the crimes that have already been committed demand from us an obligation to investigate, prosecute, and punish those, at least those with most responsibility for the commission of this act. And if it's not done in the domestic jurisdiction, it should be done by the International Criminal Court, or by, because it could be done in Darfur, against by referral of the Security Council of the new situation. And the final, preventive aspect is to work on the underlying conflict, to try to get to peace discussions, peace negotiations that put an end to the conflict. Because if we don't put an end to the conflict, it's going to surface again as soon as the international community looks some other way. I'm sorry I went too long, but thank you very much.
Absolutely terrific. Thank you so much for that broad and very thoughtful introduction. I'm going to pass the floor to David.
Thank you, Susan, and it's a great honor to be here in this wonderful room, and also meet again with Professor Juan Mendez. We are all your students, I believe. Let's go to the reason why we are here. And I want to mention one name, my colleague Mutasim Ali, because when I was searching for a venue in Washington to organize a panel on Sudan, and I realized suddenly that the author of probably the most important report of last year, indicating all the elements of the mass atrocities occurring in Sudan as being correspondent to the definition of genocide and other crimes under international law, was actually Mutasim, together with his colleague Jonah Diamond from the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights in Canada, not to be confused with the institute in Stockholm. And here we have a very important Swedish professor. And Mutasim, I know you are also a human rights defender. You left your country to study. You are a JSD candidate here in this wonderful university. Please share with us your experience. How do you view the current situation? We have seen the New York Times reporting a week and a half ago about the fact that Khartoum is now back under government control, more or less. I mean, this was on the spot. And the actual journalist who went there in Khartoum knows about, was invited to attend online, and will see us. We'll see the registration is traveling back to the US from Africa as we speak, Mr. Declan Walsh. But please share with us your experience.
Sure. Thanks a lot, David, for your very kind notes. And I'm really glad to be part of this very esteemed panel, and with my faculty advisor here. Grateful also for the school. This is actually the third event that we highlight the situation in Sudan. And I think the situation in Sudan is not really being covered enough. Known as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. And I was reading a report for armed conflict and armed conflict location and events data. And they said that Sudan is the fourth deadliest war in the world. And I think just to state the obvious, the war that is started in April 2023 is the manifestation of many years of neglect, primarily by the international community. I don't want to even talk about the government of Sudan, because in my view, it is the government of Sudan, the authorities in Sudan are complicit in all the atrocities that are happening today. But I think the failure of international community and the fact that they ignore accountability for all the atrocities that took place 20 years ago is the reason why we are seeing repeated atrocities. What we see today, for many of us, Sudanese, in particular Darfuris, we're expecting this because we're monitoring the situation, and we made the information available for the international community to intervene. The war between the Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces, they were both allying together in the early 2000s. They committed atrocities, and that's part of the reason why the situation was referred to the ICC. And Bashir was indicted for genocide in addition to other international crimes. And these two parties fell out in, I think, before April 2023. And both engaged in mass atrocities, international crimes. When we started documenting the situation in Darfur in particular, we focused on Darfur because of the ethnically motivated nature of the attacks carried out by the rapid support forces. This is not to say that the Sudanese armed forces is innocent. They carried out, indiscriminate aerial bombardments. But the rapid support forces attacked civilians, and they continue to attack civilians in Darfur along ethnic lines. And this all began with incitements. They refer to people in Sudan, in Darfur, as slaves, as black dogs, and all this kind of things. And so that sort of paved the way for the brutal killing of particularly the ethnic Masalit in West Darfur. They were celebrating that. They were posting their attacks on social media platforms. They just didn't fear anything, right? Not accountability, because they haven't seen any sort of accountability ever. In November 2023, we drafted a letter signed by many international experts, and we alerted the international community that there is a risk of genocide in Darfur, including in West Darfur and other parts of Darfur. And the idea was to say that, once the international community becomes aware of the risk of the genocide, then there is a duty to prevent, because the hallmark of the Genocide Convention, you can see this even from the name, the Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The whole idea is to prevent genocide from happening. And so the idea was to say that the state are now aware that there's serious risk of genocide, and therefore there is an obligation to prevent. Atrocities never ceased to happen. We produced the report in April 2024, and we particularly on West Darfur, Al Junaina, and Ardamata. These are the two areas where ethnically motivated attacks and genocidal attacks against the Masalit ethnic group in West Darfur were targeted by the rapid support forces and allied militias. And we concluded that the rapid support forces and allied Arab militias have engaged or have committed genocide against the Masalit. We also identified foreign actors, because it did not happen in a vacuum, right? Part of the reason why actually I think that the war is continuing until today is because of the involvement of foreign or external actors fueling the conflict. And so we concluded that many foreign actors, including the United Arab Emirates, are complicit in the genocide against the Masalit. The complicity continues to date. Of course, there are additional countries, Chad, Libya, even Sudan, and the Wagner Group, or Russia through the Wagner Group. And we recall the same call that the international community must intervene to prevent further genocide from happening. And as I am speaking now, the rapid support forces is encircling Al-Fashir. This is actually more than a year now. Al-Fashir is the capital of North Darfur. It's a hub for more than 1 million displaced persons in Abu Shok camp, in Zamzam camp, and they are nearby internally displaced persons camp. These are people that have been forced to leave their homes, even in the earlier days, like from the earlier days of the genocide, speaking of early 2000s. And at the moment, I repeat the call again, there's like a risk of a serious genocide that's going to happen right now in Al-Fashir as the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, continues to mobilize and recruit soldiers and fighters to attack Al-Fashir. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be in the next 2 days, but it will not go for more than 2 weeks or so. This is an imminent threat to civilians. These are people that have already seen atrocities before. And I just want to quickly wrap on, definitely there will be a bunch of points I would like to highlight later on, that the people in Darfur, and of course in Sudan, they begin to lose hope in the international community. This is so especially in the case of Darfur because the ICC was already mandated in 2005. 20 years, we only see one person who's not even a very senior leader. It's just a militia commander on trial right now. Since the beginning of war, to date, the ICC wasn't able to issue a single arrest warrant for all the atrocities that have taken place since April 2023. And this is another reason why a lot of people now think whether the ICC is really an effective institution. I mean, of course, we're all aware of all the challenges and the impediments that ICC is facing, including the sanctions. But definitely, this is a question that a lot of people raise. In our view at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, we believe that the most effective way to end violence in Sudan, to end the atrocities against civilians by holding the external actors fueling the conflict. Unless we do that, we will continue to see these atrocities time and again. One of the problems that we're facing today is that we've been thinking of bringing a case against states involved in fueling the atrocities in Darfur before the ICJ for breaches of international conventions, including the UAE. And one of the challenges at the moment, and of course Sudan already instituted proceedings against the UAE, is the reservation to Article 9 of the International Criminal Code, which initially allows the ICJ to exercise jurisdiction over disputes for violation of the Genocide Convention. And that is now one of the biggest impediments for prosecuting states, such as the UAE, complicit in genocide in Darfur. So I'm gonna stop there, and there's much to say to that point.
Thank you, Mutasim, and you highlighted, some very important factors. And one of our colleagues who's joining us from the UK, Mr. Yaslam Al-Tayeb, actually was in Khartoum or was in Sudan when the coup d'etat, when the armed conflicts re-erupted with essentially very strong foreign influences that may be even qualified as triggering such a conflict. So, and of course, it's really a sui generis armed conflict, because in law schools we teach about non-international conflict as being between the government and rebels, the central government and some secessionist units. But here it's the two parties of the same army that went one against each other. And our colleague, a businessman originally from Omdurman, Sudan, who later became much was there, and these violence re-erupted. I would like to invite him. I heard him speaking eloquently at the Geneva Club side event to the Human Rights Council. It's really a great honor to have you with us, Yaslam. Please share with us your experience.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be with you today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel. Regarding the situation in Sudan and what Sudan is going through right now, and the experience that I experienced in being in the war and as a captive by the RSF, the first thing that need to be mentioned is actually what the Sudanese people been going through since 1983. It's not just 23. It started from 1983. And that is the start of the embargoes that is being put on Sudan since then. That's start crippling the countries and dismantling the countries from within, and by the curfews and so on. When we reached the 90s, I remember my stepfather used to be one of the leaders of the oppositions. And every time that we have an international delegation coming to visit the government of Sudan, they come to us in our house to have a discussion with him before they go and meet with the officials. And my stepfather used to start by mentioning to them that is actually all the sanctions, all the punishment being put on Sudan was actually harming the Sudanese people more than the government itself. Is harming Sudan as a country more than harming the government itself. And I believe that is as a result of one of the main issues that's actually being a cause of what's going on in Sudan, and the negligence, being neglected by the international communities on the later stage and being stomped down every time. As a result of it, for example, I'll give you a simple example that is attending this conference itself. It was difficult for me to attend with you because I am originally Sudanese, so I can't have the visa easily to come to the United States to attend with you. I can't, for example, there is financial aspect when I am a European national, but still I have issues having, for example, certain bank accounts, transactions, and so on because of my origin as a Sudanese. That impacted also the Sudan itself. Now back to the situation in Sudan. I prepared actually the ground in the late from 2010 upward. Yes, there is Sudanese, they were struggling. Yes, there is injustice in Sudan. All over the country, not just in certain areas. There was death tolls before that in the Blue Nile, in South Kordofan, in Darfur, and so on. So it's not something that is only located just in Darfur, but Sudan was in fight in all the borders of Sudan was a hot zones. Darfur is the biggest one later, but don't forget we had the longest war in Africa, which is in the south of Sudan before it broke on 2013. Now, all this, the international community deal with Sudan in a political point of view, and they're forgetting that there is millions of people living in that country. The country of Sudan is not just have 45 to 50 million people. It have over 400 ethnicity, different ethnicities. These ethnicities, all this pressure being put on them, destabilize the cohesion between these ethnicities. Yes, there is the crimes committed in Darfur that was ethnical cleansing, but I believe that is in 1880 or between 1870 to 1880 is committed also in the center of Sudan. The same issue was committed by the Mahdi era. And it's the same crimes, the same genocides, and so on. So addressing all these, it's supposed to be, when there is any action against Sudan, to be put in mind that is the Sudanese people, how you incorporate the Sudanese people, and so on. Now, being in there in the start of the war, the RSF started. It's not. Also, this is one of the things that is that most of the people they don't know about. The RSF is started as an RSF in 2013, yes, but there used to be the Janjaweed before that, and that is in the 80s, 1980s. It started by Fadlallah Burma Nasir, which is part of the Freedom and Change and part of the RSF right now. He's the first person in the Sadiq al-Mahdi democratic government in 1988 and 1987. He's the first people who armed the Janjaweed in Darfur to fight against the Darfurian people. In the first rebellion, sorry, it wasn't against Darfur, but was in the SPLA, the northern section. Now, that is the first point of the killing starting in Darfur, by arming the Arab militias in Darfur. And it moved on to be developed to become the RSF, which is existing now. Then the situation now we're being facing, when I was there, I was linked with a lot of the leaders, so an RSF or the army or the politicians. And I was witnessing the development of the situation in Sudan, day by day, hour by hour, until I got caught by the RSF. And I saw before and after, when I was a captive, the Emiratis involvement itself, the intelligence gathering centers built in Khartoum Itnain and Al-Mashia, the officers who took the first group, I remember, I met some of them, 13 to be trained for the drone use. That's well before 2023. That's 2022, something like that, well before the war. And the preparation of the RSF itself beforehand, the expansion of it, RSF, it wasn't part of the army, it was part of the intelligence and security. It was just a force to stamp down on the rebellions in Darfur. And that, bringing it back in 2019 and making it as a force and making it bigger than what is supposed to be, from 13,000 to 35,000, and jump to 105,000, and jump to 150,000 soldiers, and given armored vehicles by the UAE, you're given more technology, advanced technology than the army itself by the UAE, trained, taken to fight in Yemen in UAE uniforms. Even the attempt to overthrow the government in Qatar, when they tried by the ground force, that was by the RSF, taken and put in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. And it's been folded down when the Sudanese president called them back to Sudan. Now, RSF partnership with the UAE did not start in 2023 or 2019. It started well before that. And it was really very solid relationship that is beneficial for the UAE, and even the Hemeti before this war, he had a say going on him that this is a gun for hire. Now, in the events happened in the war, after the war and the atrocities, the genocide is not just in Darfur. You have what Noura, there was a genocide. Lately, just last week, was in Jammuria, in the White Nile state. You have the Al Jazeera massacres, atrocities. I witnessed myself when I was being freed the dead bodies on the way from just about 500 meters from there, where I was detained, to where my office is in Riyadh district. In the way, I saw 2 cars with the people on them, dead. I believe that is for some days. Nobody's moving them. People dead in the water canal, in the ditches. Right, and when I came out, the first thing I mentioned, that is, will be hundreds of people, or maybe thousands of people, dead in their houses, and nobody knows about them. Right now, every area get cleared. They found dead people in their houses, in their hundreds and in their thousands. Now, that is, nobody's talking about. Nobody's mentioning anything. Yeah, I with all the respect for what's going on, that all the focus is on Darfur, which is it's deservedly, but the rest of Sudan is the same. There is the targeting of the RSF, not just to the civilians. All the killing, if you follow it, it's focusing on civilians. It's focusing on civilian buildings, hospitals, schools, electricity, power supplies. Now, even with the shortage of it in Sudan, before the war, there was a big issue with the electricity itself. Water supplies. One of the doctors that is the one who killed his family and threw the bodies of them in the well to dismantle the well, which is serving the big area for the water. Now all these crimes is classified as war crimes and genocides, but no action towards it. Even the action taken by the international community is so little, and when it is being taken, it's taken in the wrong pretext or the wrong narrative or politically fueled. It's not addressing the main problem and the need, which is the Sudanese people need, is to stop the genocide, stop the killing, Al-Fashir, and therefore in whole, there is a resolution from the Security Council in place, but yet it's being violated and nobody making any move regarding it. Al-Fashir now, everybody is, for the last year, 12 months, people crying out regarding Al-Fashir. Since I came out, I got involved in multiple activities. Part of it, I started, for example, an organization. It's called Sawaid. Now, Sawaid is one of the first organizations to start a food center, which is not started yet in Al-Fashir. We're organizing that now, but we realize that is actually, there is not much being offered in Al-Fashir for the people. In Khartoum, in Al Jazeera, in all these areas, there is nothing being served for helping the people there. We organize also something called the right narrative. It's just to bring the truthful information to the international community, because there is none. And the lack of interest from the international community, the lack of interest from the media internationally, that is, I don't know if that's negligence, like what my friend Matthew say, or they just don't care, or they actually like what is happening. Maybe it's for a later stage, or maybe it's just Africans, they kill each other like every time. But there is no any action, humanitarian or political, or even shedding a light on what's going on in Sudan. And that is actually damaging more than what is the bullets is doing. So Sudan is actually suffering more from these than the actual fighting itself. We have people dying for years and years out of lack of medicines. We have people dying, plus the war, yes, is worsened and make it worse, but the people suffer. We have children in one village called Al-Manasir. Dr. Ahmed can tell you about it as well. Manasir, they die from scorpion stings between 80 to 350 child per year. This is one village. It's just a group of villages next to each other in the north of Sudan. And there is no way for these children to be saved because there is no hospital next to them. And the antivenom, because of the heat in that region and no electricity, is useless like water. So the suffering of the Sudanese people is far, far more than just the war. And I believe I took my time more than of the time of the people in the panel. So because I see that we are more.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think here to just shed a light on something that is not reported. Of course, the major problem is that it's not safe to enter Sudan. Anyone like me can take a car, cross the border from Poland, enter into Ukraine, report on the war. A lot of people are allowed through Palestinian networks to enter into the Gaza Strip and report. Sudan, unfortunately, is a very, or fortunately, is a very big country, and the situation is quite different. And certainly what you have said is so the humanitarian emergencies extraordinary there. Doctor, we'll come back to many of your points, and I think you really shed a light on the nexus of causality in the conduct of the RSF and the leadership of the United Arab Emirates. Because there is a nexus of causality between what happens by this armed group and what has been defined and described and funded and moved forward by the leadership of a state that is considered a close ally. And that's why 7 companies under UAE law under currently US sanctions, because they're in charge of the trading gold and other artifacts that are being looted and taken out. We'll go back to that. Now probably we will hear from another survivor who might put a lot of emphasis on Darfur. Let me just say here, colleagues here agree with me, all victims are equal, not because Darfur is under the jurisdiction of the ICC because of the resolution of 2005, that the situation of Sudan must be distinguished from the situation, the sub-situation in Darfur. It happens that under international criminal law, we have one tool to intervene in Darfur that we do not have yet on the rest of the country. So I'm really delighted to give the floor to the strongest advocate for justice in Darfur since more than 20 years, my friend and colleague, Dr. Niemat Ahmadi, is the president of the Darfur Women Action. Niemat, you have no more than 8 minutes. If you can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'll try to be very brief. Thank you so much for the organizer for putting this event together and for inviting me and allowing us the opportunity to shed the light on the atrocities that has been going on in Sudan. As we speak, the scope and the magnitude of the crisis in Sudan is far beyond something that we can capture in word or any kind of description. I don't think in the recent history there has been atrocities that this this huge and this dire and destructive. It has been 2 years now since the war started, where this destruction, human suffering, the number of displacement, and people who have been forced to flee the country as refugees, but also systematic attack on a specific group of people, as Mutasim mentioned, is not only the Masalid, but every cities that were attacked after Al Junaina were targeted on ethnic basis, like Zalingi, Forbranga, Kutum, Tawila. These are all emptied of its population. An attack has been directed not just to people, but also precisely to internal displaced people. And we've seen that right now in Al-Fashir. Abu Shok has received the most shelling from RSF, but then also Zamzam now become the #1 target for the rapid support forces trying to overtake Al-Fashir. The problem, I'm not going to go into details, as my colleague both Mutasim and Yaslam has touched into the situation. The how to end and what needs to be done, that is why I'm going to focus. One of the issues over the year has been a kind of delayed or complicated the resolution to the situation in Sudan is a narrative, because the conflict or the crisis has been called many different names, and you in the legal community, you know that when a wrong narrative is being used, it's just like when the doctor prescribed wrong prescription for the ill person, that either they like kill them or either not treating them and then they continue to suffer. The same situation, the international community, regional actor, even Sudanese themselves has been mischaracterizing the crisis. Some look at Sudan pre-2019, even though the genocide in Darfur has been going on, as like issue of governance or issue of democratic transformation, while the actual situation is a systemic attack by those have power against the powerless. We have seen that in the longest-standing genocide in Darfur. The government of al-Bashir has precisely systematically targeted the tribes before even rebellion start in Darfur by 3 years, whereby specific ethnic group have been targeted. And as Dr. Yaslam mentioned, there hasn't been president in Sudan who ruled the Sudan without committing mass killing or gross human rights violation, but because there is no accountability whatsoever. And that has created historical grievances that has never been resolved. And although I think Sudan needs a different framework, it is the traditional conflict resolutions are not going to help resolve the crisis in Sudan, because also for the fact that they assume a political settlement will resolve the crisis in Sudan, bringing the perpetrators to negotiate peace with the victims, and they are the one who decide on the fate of that, the implementation of that peace. And that is what we have seen in Darfur over the years. There has been several negotiations. Even the CPA has been violated by keeping Abyei, the Nuba Mountain, and the Blue Nile. So it's kind of a trend. And then now to the crisis of today, it's the same way. Right now, the narrative has slightly changed, because now there is a fight between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces. But well, Sudan Armed Forces has created the Rebel Support Forces under Bashir, and then the current Sudan Armed Forces are the one who get the Rebel Support Forces into the presidential palace in 2019, conducted a coup, destroyed the revolution, and right now we are facing this war. So I think there is a need for an atrocity prevention framework to resolve the crisis in Sudan. And how that works, that starts with accountability. Giving the example, looking into the previous cases like Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, Liberia. And Liberia was the best example when Charles Taylor was exiled and then later transferred to The Hague to face accountability. That's the only time when the Liberian people were able to come together and negotiate a peace and determine that their country can be transformed. And that is exactly what we need in Sudan. But they also have, I wanted to divide like long-term, short-term. Short-term right now in Sudan, there is a dire need for civilian protection. And when we emphasize Darfur, of course, the crimes committed across the Sudan, it mount to war crimes. But the crimes that are committed in Darfur were very, very systemic, even back during al-Mahdi regime. And now it is the Arab militias with aid from other military groups back from Khartoum, but now on their own, but they're enablers in the region, attacking indigenous African people who have been attacked 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. The same people have been the victims. So that need to be understood and articulated and carefully approach to have a solution. Currently, we are asking for demanding civilian protection. We know of the resolution that was introduced by the UK and Sierra Leone, and unfortunately, it was vetoed by Russia. And as a result of that, we have advocated also the options of calling for a coalition of willing, that a group that will be able to protect civilians, because in order to bring solution, you need to keep people alive. Otherwise, by the time you bring solution, people will already be killed. Given the magnitude of the mass killing that we have seen right now, that can be through like African unions, through other like Western government, but then there is a need for civilian protection, urgent humanitarian aid to keep people alive and restore the dignity of the people who are starving from Al Junaina to like God knows Al Jazeera and other areas in Sudan. And then accountability. The solution must start with accountability. I think if we can provide civilian protection, because the level of militarization right now in Sudan is beyond repair. Even if today we have a full peace agreement and ceasefire, that killing and the militarization is not going to end, because these young people who have been mobilized by the rapid support forces, and then also other young people who have been mobilized by Sudan armed forces, will carry their gun and go home. Go home to whom? To their families, their neighbors, their villages, their towns. And that is something that we need to stop, and without a neutral body cannot be stopped. And then the accountability aspect and using an atrocity prevention framework that look critically into the situation, defining it as where there is a genocide, we have to call it a genocide. Where there is war crimes, we have to use the international law framework to frame it. This is war crimes and crimes against humanity. And if there are other crimes, we need to look into that. The attack on women. We are pleased to see that ICC has included that in the arrest warrant against Bashir, but then today, the level of attack on women in Sudan is beyond our imagination. That need to be dealt with. We also have advocated for sanctions, and we advocated targeted sanctions, not sanctioning the country and the people, but individual actors who have ignited this war, who continue to rage war and continue to prevent the war from ending and also blocking humanitarian aid. And then companies that we also like accountability has to be for both sides, the perpetrators and enablers. In the past, the ICC was not successful because they are using financing from the regional and international enabler to evade justice. And that is why we call for accountability. But I also think perpetrators, including United Arab Emirates, there is also Sudan Armed Forces, they have their own friends, Egypt, Iran and Turkey, who are also alleged to be supporting Sudan armed forces. And then there are individuals who are also igniting war and spreading hate speech who are sitting in the diaspora. You will find someone has a US citizenship who is affiliated with the rapid support forces and will be sitting here and directing the forces on the ground, or sitting in the UK. So I think there is an opportunity that also cases can be brought against people so that limit the ability of those who are supporting RSF and other fighters, especially within the context of the Genocide Convention, within the context of accountability. I think that needs to be looked into. And also financial accountability with companies that are dealing with these gold companies that are sitting in the United Arab Emirates. There are some other Western companies who are also investing with those companies. If we can bring cases against those companies, also will show that not only the perpetrators, but also the enablers can be held accountable. I will stop here and will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. And you really provided a very broad framework of action. Driver from Dr. Sciences, the study of authoritarianism. He was in the UAE and he was subjected to inhuman treatment, and he could really shed a light on the linkages between the totalitarianism that exists in that country and the fact and the conduct that they are undertaking in Sudan as well as in other regions.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here and for listening and for having me here. So as David said, I was arbitrarily detained by the UAE State Security Department. I was tortured over 7 months, and I was later sentenced to life imprisonment for espionage. My PhD is in the UAE, and I have a very long experience looking at what they do internally and internationally. Because of that, I've been scrupulously watching, observing, seeing what they do at home and how that then mirrors, how that is a parallel to what they do internationally. What they're doing in Sudan is simply a replication of what they've done in Libya, what they've done in Yemen, what they're doing in Somalia. And they've learned from the British. They've learned from us, which is divide and conquer. And if that doesn't work, you have to divide them even further. They always pursue security and intelligence. So when you're speaking about how the Janjaweed, how that evolved and how that was predominantly made up of say, the intelligence personnel, this is the exact same way in which they have used General Haftar in Libya, and using his ability, his natural security architecture as a driving force that can control the state. It's the same in South Yemen, where during the US and UK's security sector reform, they tried to split the intelligence organizations and between the National Security Bureau and the Political Security Office. And so this Western security entity is what the UAE have used as a platform to initiate the STC, the Southern Transition Council's nation-building piece. In Sudan, obviously they engaged with a force that had previously committed genocide. They had sought to align themselves with Russia's Wagner Group, now the Africa Corps. How these interests intercede different countries across Africa, and because the RSF weren't able to secure al-Fasher by the end of the year, and that was when they wrote a letter to the US and they said, we're gonna, there will be no more military support for the RSF. It was a kind of a slight admission of guilt, but it was trying to build bridges. This, of course, has been completely rubbished, undermined, and seen for what it is, an act of duplicity. Arms transfers have continued. This is a well-known fact for many years. The UAE has been not just the overwhelming, I think for several years, it was the destination for 100% of Sudan's gold. So if you want to impact change, it's very easy to identify and to target the UAE's gold industry, because it contains resources which have been extracted within areas where war crimes have been ongoing. I've been a victim of the UAE's torture. I've seen others being tortured. I was threatened with rendition to an overseas base, of which probably would have been Eritrea or Somalia or Yemen. I can only imagine the extent to which they are legitimizing these sorts of actions in other countries. And by working with these sorts of actors, it really doesn't take, it shouldn't be a surprise that they're not really sharing humanitarian values. They're not really in pursuit of change. They're in pursuit of change for their own interest, which is, it's what the international arena is. But their involvement in Sudan is extremely sensitive, not just for them, but also for many Western states. This is an issue which could potentially be a necessary outlet to be able to leverage and demand change. If you are to look at it in comparison, when the Saudis and Emiratis were conducting war crimes in Yemen, including bombing a funeral procession, killing hundreds, a school bus, and these sorts of things, there were reforms, there were sanctions placed on Saudi, on the UAE for this. Weapons were limited, relations were soured. Now, I believe Representatives Gregory Meeks and Sarah Jacobs, they sought to re-implement a bill on Sudan. This is a very formal and a good mechanism to explore, but you must then see this in context. The UAE's National Security Advisor, Tahnoun bin Zayed, was here 3 weeks ago. The UAE is committing billions of investment. So it's extremely hard for the administration to then to maybe promote scrutiny, to maybe highlight these actions which they don't particularly agree with. Now, because the UAE and the RSF weren't able to achieve their objectives in that short term, they are simply doubling down on their regional foreign policy approach by promoting further instability across borders across the continent. They gave 1.5 billion in a loan to Kenyan President William Ruto for hosting RSF delegations. This has destabilized, this has further brought Kenya into the Sudanese conflict. Chad, South Sudan, Ethiopia are increasingly involved, as well as Somalia, and this is completely part of the UAE's design. Try to maximize chaos, try to maximize instability, because Turkish influence in Somalia is linked in different ways, or it's threatened, and this is where the US and UAE are involved in counterterrorism operations against Al-Shabaab, against Daesh, and everything else. And what are they doing in Somalia? What is the approach? They are promoting, either it could be the right model or not, but they're promoting the independence of Somaliland as a sovereign state, potentially also Puntland. But this is mirroring what they could seek to achieve in Sudan through the government in exile, this new political unit with, I think, Mini Manab and some others were looking to potentially try and create another government within Sudan. That's because if they feel they can't achieve control of the entire unit, they will simply seek to fragment the country even further. And this is a model which they pursue in many different countries. It really is simple and yet sophisticated. And I suppose lastly, the talk about the sanctions against these 7 Sudanese companies in the UAE. The UAE is going to be heard at the ICJ. There's going to be a ministerial meeting in London about Sudan. The UAE is extremely sensitive to any criticism, any concern. This has caused quite sour relations at times. In the last week, they've been promoting the idea, they've been sharing information that the UAE isn't actually involved in gold smuggling, in financing. And so the UAE Ministry of Justice announced that the US was wrong and that these companies are not actually active. This is maybe one of the problems with sanctions. Well, you just need to change a company name, you need to do whatever it is. But if 100% of the gold goes through it, they're still working these channels. But I can say as an observer, the one way in which you can hold a state like the UAE to account, or a way in which there really is pressure being felt, is through the commercial sectors. Any potential affiliation, any potential exposure to companies operating with close to by conflict zones such as Sudan, or with personnel who oversee it, such as Tahnoon bin Zayed and the many different entities and organizations he operates. This very much is a tool that private institutions from Microsoft down to small and medium entities are really cautious about. So calling that out and really ensuring that that remains a prominent point is crucial.
Thank you, David, and for the extraordinary interventions of all of you, of all of the speakers who have gone so far. It's really given me a lot of food for thought. So thank you again. I want to turn to our last two speakers on the panel to continue this important discussion and to focus perhaps again on some of what can be done, what should be done, what are the legal and accountability options now that we've talked about some of the struggles, some of the facts on the ground. I want to turn first to Professor Hamilton, who is Professor of Law here at American University, Washington College of Law, teaching international law, national security law, and criminal law. Professor Hamilton, you've been engaged in this struggle for justice in Sudan for a long time. In 2011, you published a book entitled Fighting for Darfur Public Action and the Struggle to Stop Genocide. And I think you've reflected in public spaces among some of the lessons learned from that, and you've spoken about your work. And some of the lessons on the book is sort of the need to put Darfur in this broader context that we've been talking about of the overarching conflicts in Sudan, and to look at how interconnected these conflicts are. And in light of that, and maybe some other lessons learned from your previous work on Sudan, the question we have on the table is, how should the U.S. and the international community respond to the Biden administration's determination that what has occurred in Sudan since April of 2023 is genocide, given what we heard from Professor Mendes on states' obligations to prevent and punish genocide? What actions can and should be taken by the U.S., by the international community to respond to the genocide and to really try to bring an end to the immense suffering of the people of Sudan, including, but not only, the region, those living in the region of Darfur?
There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us on the panel. It's very rare, actually, that we get to hear from someone who has been directly impacted by the harms that the UAE is perpetrating across the world. We talk in language like complicity and bad actors, and I think we miss the human impact of that. And thank you also to my incredible Sudanese colleagues. Mr. Al-Tayeb, I don't know you, we haven't met, but thank you for your speech today. Nimat, we've known each other for 20-some years, and you continue to be the most effective advocate for Sudanese that I've met in my entire life. Thank you for Darfur Women's Action Group for being dogged and persistent year after year after year. And to Mutassim, who is my SJD student, incredibly, this man is writing his dissertation while writing literally the document that everybody is referring to about the genocide that is taking place currently in Sudan. I don't know how you do it, but I am so grateful that you are here with us. And I should just say, you didn't say it, but you should. This dissertation that Mutassim is working on grapples directly with the point that Nimat is raising, is that we have got to stop doing the same thing over and over again and failing, which is to say, after every conflict in Sudan, South Sudan the same, we set up this peace agreement, which involves power sharing between the men with guns, and then move on. And it doesn't work. We have decades of experience in saying that this does not work. Mutassim's dissertation is working on an approach that switches up that dynamic and is going to give us something different to hope for going forward. So it's so important that you're doing what you do. And I have so much sort of emotion in my heart coming to this panel because it is 20 years ago that I first was on the Chad-Darfur border in the refugee camps. And I was thinking this morning particularly of a Masalit woman that I met in the camp who was nursing her baby who was 40 days old. The child was the product of a rape by the Janjaweed. And that child, who I haven't stayed connected to, but that child, if she is alive, is 20 years old today. And in the situation where, on the basis of her ethnicity, she is again being subject to genocide. And so if there is a stronger indictment of all of us, I really don't know what it is. So these thoughts will come together, I think. If let me lay out first the way that I see the question of atrocity prevention, which is that it operates in a circular shape, if you can visualize it. And in the aftermath of atrocity, the actions taken lay the landscape for whether you have a chance at prevention or whether you are setting your landscape for repeated atrocities in the future. And again, unfortunately, Sudan is living proof that this cycle is an accurate description of what is happening when we talk about atrocity prevention. I end up being on so many panels where you get baited into, justice versus peace. And of course, it is not one or the other, right? And in the absence of justice in the aftermath of atrocity, you do not get sustainable peace. And I should be really clear that justice does not just mean international criminal justice. It does not just mean justice. I mean truly holistic, society-wide justice and reckoning with the root causes of the conflict, which have remained consistent over time. I think just to sort of detail this a little more, it is extraordinary today as I look back over the past 20 years, the degree to which not only we have victim and survivor communities that are the same, but the perpetrators are the same people, like to the same individuals. So in the 2003, 2004 and onwards genocide, at the time where it was President Bashir in control of the Sudanese armed forces, and General Burhan was there as part of the Sudanese armed forces. At that time, they were using as their proxy to perpetrate the genocide in Darfur, the Janjaweed, drawn from landless Arab tribes predominantly in the region. Later, Bashir decided to formalize those Janjaweed into the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces, led by Hemeti. Today, what we are seeing in this war that is playing out, with civilians being the sole losers, as they always are, is between General Burhan and Hemeti, the exact same players. So again, if Sudan is not the #1 case study for how the international community fails at atrocity prevention, then we're doing something very strange in our study of this problem. So what we had is simultaneously a direct conflict, the same, another iteration of the same one that has been playing out in Sudan for decades, that relates to power, and it is the same techniques being used over and over again. but it is simultaneously a proxy conflict between these external actors. And any response to what is happening is going to have to be grappling with both at the same time. And that is very, very hard. And that's okay. It should be hard. If you're going to solve hard problems, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. On the regional and proxy piece of this, there was some, I think, congratulations toward the Biden administration when they announced these sanctions against individuals in the RSF and against these companies with the UAE connections and recognizing the UAE's complicity in this. The trouble is that sanctions are a tool. They are not a replacement for a strategy. And unless you are connecting them to a strategy, then they're just circumvented and can end up as a fig leaf for really meaningful action. And unfortunately, that is exactly what we have seen in this situation. So I have no, I can't feel I can't feel any warmth to the fact that we have some sanctions, right? What we need to see is an actual strategy that figures out how you get these external actors to the point where they disengage from meddling, from fueling, from incentivizing the actors on the ground to continue this violence. And it is very difficult for me to see how we're going to get there, especially in a moment when the United States does absolutely not have its head around the very complicated diplomacy required to make that happen. But just to say, until that proxy piece changes, then you are not going to get a resolution. At the same time, and this is why you've got to be doing two things at once, there's the question of the direct conflict. And here, this is where Mutassam's work is going to come in, I hope, eventually. Throughout this past 20 years, the only actors that have been reliably serving the interests of the Sudanese people are Sudanese civil society themselves. They are the only ones that have stuck with this situation through thick and thin. They are the people who were responsible for the brief moment of hope we had in the overthrow of Bashir. It was organizing and mobilizing by students, by unions, the incredible emergency response rooms and neighborhood resistance committees that were set up. And what is devastating, devastation upon devastation to acknowledge at this moment, is so much of that work was being supported by USAID. And that would have been the most cost-effective intervention, frankly, that the United States could make in this situation, and we've gutted it. And so we look to the rest of the world in this moment with humility and sadness to ask others to help step up in support and solidarity of those actors who are, I am absolutely convinced, the key to any future peace in Sudan. Without them, I don't care how many peace agreements you sign, how many power sharing governments you set up, we cannot get to sustainable peace. I'm sorry to end on such a bleak note, but that is truly what I feel in this moment. And so I just repeat my gratitude again to our Sudanese colleagues here around the world, and in particular in Sudan, who are continuing to pursue peace despite getting absolutely nowhere near what they deserve from the rest of us.
Thank you on that somber but very real note. I think I want to give our last speaker the floor to talk a little bit, to continue this conversation. Professor Milena Serio is James A. Thomas Distinguished Professor of Law at Cleveland State University's College of Law and Managing Director of the Public International Law and Policy Group. As we've talked about here, the ICC opened an investigation in Darfur in 2005 based on the referral of the UN Security Council to the court. Since then, as we've talked about, the court issued 2 arrest warrants against then sitting President al-Bashir. He was the first sitting president against whom arrest warrants were issued by the court and the first person to be charged by the ICC for the crime of genocide, at least in the second arrest warrant. Neither of the 2 arrest warrants against him have been enforced, as we've talked about, and he's not in the court's custody. Al-Bashir was ousted in 2019, and he has, I think, faced some corruption charges at home, but never been transferred to the court for crimes relating to the mass atrocities committed in Darfur. He's traveled, actually, to various state parties and non-state parties to the Rome Statute after the arrest warrants, and still was never transferred to the court. As we've heard, now much of the current conflict is driven by fighting between 2 forces who were loyal to one of the 2 leaders who were allies in the 2019 ouster of al-Bashir. As Professor Hamilton just said, exact same players, right? It's hard to be here 20 years later with the exact same players. So with sort of all of that, I want to ask you to sort of help us dig a little deeper into what are the prospects for holding anyone criminally liable for genocide, for other atrocity crimes, whether from the earlier or current conflicts in Sudan. What are the options for justice that exist at the moment? Floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. So let me begin by also thanking the organizers of this panel, the moderators, and let me just express my honor and gratitude in being in the company of such distinguished experts, our Sudanese colleagues, and those of you who have experienced the atrocities of the war on your own skin. Let me warn you that I'm also going to be fairly pessimistic. So if you're looking for a note of optimism, I think you're in the wrong place. Might be time to go. But let me, before I discuss some of the accountability options, let me return to 2 points that have already been raised by my colleagues, some of the previous remarks in some of the previous remarks here today. So first, let me emphasize the fact that 20 years ago in 2005, the UN Security Council voted a resolution in which it referred the situation in Darfur to the International Criminal Court. This is extraordinary because it signals the international community's agreement that atrocity crimes have taken place in this region. The Security Council does not agree on anything. Think of how polarized it is. Think how difficult it is to vote anything, to vote any successful resolution in the Security Council. And so it is extraordinary that this happened, but it also signals, unfortunately, the fact that there is consensus in the international community that horrific crimes have taken place in the Darfur region. On this note, I would also agree with some of the previous panelists that while it is always difficult to start comparing situations and crises, and it's always tricky once you start saying, well, this situation over here is worse than the situation over there, it is true that seemingly the international community has focused less on Sudan compared to some of the other crises. And so I'm particularly happy that we are here today to discuss the ongoing crises in Sudan and in the Darfur region in particular. And then I also wanted to just emphasize some of the findings of the Sudan Task Force for Accountability and Justice, the Wallenberg Center, because you've talked about it and my colleague, Professor Hamilton, has also talked about it. But let me emphasize some of the concrete findings of that report, because I do think that they deserve extra attention. So the report concluded that based on clear and convincing evidence, the RSF and allied militias have committed and are committing genocide against the Masalid, one of the non-Arab groups in the Darfur region. The report also emphasized that the RSF is carrying out systematic attacks and atrocities in West Darfur, targeting not just the Masalid, but also other non-Arab Masalid groups in the region. And that the only reasonable inference to be made from these patterns is an intent to destroy the Masalid group in whole or in part. The report also concluded that all 153 state parties to the Genocide Convention are obligated to end complicity in and employ all means reasonably available to prevent and halt genocide. And so although there isn't an obligation to intervene, as Professor Mendez told us earlier, state parties to the Genocide Convention are obligated to employ all means reasonably available to prevent the commission of genocide. And recently, we have seen litigation in the International Court of Justice where states have used the Genocide Convention in order to bring cases to try to force other states to end genocidal acts and to try to get the International Court of Justice to issue provisional measures to at least impose legal obligations on some states to end genocidal acts. In addition, the report concluded that based on clear and convincing evidence, the following actors are complicit in the genocide: Sudan, the country of Sudan, the United Arab Emirates, Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, and also Russia through the actions of the Wagner Group, which is under its effective control. These are some extraordinary findings because not only are you highlighting the fact that genocidal acts have taken place in the Darfur region, but you're also highlighting complicity by various states. And so you mentioned the very recent lawsuit that was just filed in the International Court of Justice against the UAE, and the very significant obstacle that litigation is facing, which is the Article 9 reservation to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, which the United Arab Emirates has, and the precedent of the ICJ, which confirms that these types of reservations are valid, that they're not contrary to the object and purpose of the Genocide Convention. And so unless the ICJ is willing to reverse itself on this point, which I'm not optimistic that it will, and again, sorry to be so pessimistic, you never know, right? But I think the prospects of that litigation surviving the jurisdictional stage are fairly slim. Nonetheless, I do think it's important that this litigation is taking place because I think part of the objectives of this lawsuit is to put pressure on the UAE, to emphasize the situation, to emphasize the UAE complicity in the ongoing genocide, and to try to exert political pressure and other kinds of diplomatic pressure on the UAE. Matthew, you emphasize how sensitive they are to all sorts of criticism. Well, they're certainly going to be facing criticism in the international community because of this lawsuit in the International Court of Justice. Now, let me turn to some of the accountability options that are there, at least in theory, for the prosecution of genocide and other atrocity crimes. So in the situation of Sudan and situation in Darfur, in light of the 2005 Security Council referral, the ICC has jurisdiction, even though Sudan is not a state party, and even though most of the acts committed seem to have been committed by nationals of non-ICC member states. So the ICC has jurisdiction, but I'm not very optimistic as to how effective the ICC investigation in Sudan will actually be and whether the ICC will actually be able to impose accountability on anyone. As Susanna just mentioned, the arrest warrants have remained not enforced. Al-Bashir, while he was president, was able to travel to multiple countries, even though he's no longer president and is on some type of house arrest. It's sort of unclear what is happening. I think the prospect of him being extradited to The Hague are extremely slim. I don't think that we're going to see that happen anytime soon. And so without al-Bashir in custody, without other defendants in custody, it is questionable as how effective the International Criminal Court will actually be. Now, as David knows, I am one of the biggest supporters of the court, and I'm not here to criticize the court, but I think it'd be unfair of me to sit here and not mention that the court has faced serious legitimacy challenges over the last decade, that it is a relatively I pause, I paused before saying this, but it is a relatively unsuccessful court compared to, for example, the Yugoslavia or the Rwanda tribunals when it comes to the number of defendants that it has in custody, the number of trials that it has actually accomplished, the number of convicted defendants. And so while the ICC is a theoretical option for accountability, I am not so sure that we will see actual accountability coming from The Hague. The other accountability option that I would emphasize are universal jurisdiction proceedings in national courts of other countries. We have seen a renewed focus on those types of universal jurisdiction cases, in particular in the context of Syria. So I'm sure that some of you have heard of cases where Syrian defendants have been prosecuted and convicted and sentenced in Germany. There's also a case pending in France. There's an arrest warrant from France against Assad. There are other cases and investigations that have taken place in the courts of mostly European countries, but we do have the precedent. There's also Argentina. There's a precedent in Argentina. There's a case against the Myanmar military generals, and actually a request for 25 arrest warrants against military generals in Myanmar. So we definitely have precedent for cases under universal jurisdiction. And so it is entirely possible that we will see proceedings in the courts of third states. Query as to whether individuals, the Sudanese military and political leaders, those most responsible for the atrocities that have taken place, query whether they will actually be arrested. The most successful universal jurisdiction cases, those in Germany, have taken place because those Syrian nationals were actually in Germany at the time that these cases commenced and were able to be arrested and were able to actually be prosecuted. But I would not disregard the possibility of universal jurisdiction proceedings in domestic courts. And then last but not least, there is the option of creating some kind of a special ad hoc court. There's definitely a little bit of a fatigue in the international community when it comes to the creation of new ad hoc courts. There are currently discussions ongoing about the creation of an aggression tribunal for Ukraine in partnership between Ukraine and the Council of Europe. There's also a new court that is being created in the Gambia in a partnership between the Gambia and ECOWAS. I understand that much of the funding for that court is now on pause because of the recent actions of the Trump administration, but those conversations have been taking place. And so there's at least a possibility of the creation of some kind of an ad hoc accountability mechanism for Darfur. I would mention here that the Juba peace agreement, which, I completely agree with Professor Hamilton that it was a totally ineffective peace agreement, but the Juba peace agreement and its Darfur tract called for the creation of the special court on the crimes of Darfur, which was supposed to have jurisdiction over genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other grave violations of international human rights law and humanitarian law, and which was supposed to be a national mechanism overseen by experts and specialists from the African Union. Now, again, ineffective peace agreement no longer in place, but the reason I mention it is that it does reflect this call for accountability coming from people in Sudan, but also supported by the region, by the African Union, and supported by the international community. And so, and the last thing that I would mention here is that in addition to accountability, I would advocate in favor of a more holistic transitional justice approach for Sudan, which I believe is necessary. I would argue that in addition to accountability, we also need truth and reconciliation commissions, committees, bodies. We need reparations for victims. We need DDR, we need SSR. We need a lot more than just accountability. And I do think that it's only through a holistic transitional justice approach that we will actually see peace and justice in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really like how you ended where we started, because all of what you said is basically the 4-point plan that Professor Mendes talked about with respect to prevention, requisites for prevention. So thank you again. I'm going to give it over to David. I think there's a few more comments from our panelists that may want to be said.
I need to do my job as a citizen falls under the jurisdiction of the ICC. So if I commit any crime outside the territories, and together with Professor Klamberg, we are also from the European Union, so we have a special responsibility. I think we need to keep our eyes open in a positive way, Milena, sorry to contradict you, allow me to the practice of sealed arrest warrants. And good morning, Mr. Duterte, war on drugs, and many body bags of thousands of people killed. He's not anymore the president, but he was arrested in his own country. Very important. On a basis of a supposed Interpol request, which does not exist, of course. There is no Interpol request. Interpol is a channel of communication for the ICC for its requests. So I would be a little bit more optimistic. And in my view, if the nexus of causality can be established between this mega operation on the border within Chad, where the UAE essentially, as the New York Times reported as early as in September 2024, invested the same amount of the GDP of Chad of the previous year on a single fake humanitarian operation with big signs, hospitals, maybe also real hospitals, but in reality, the conduit, the passing points for any types of weaponry and so on. Well, these people, they travel, they love to travel. And especially those in the military apparatus, those who are not sitting heads of states. We're talking about still very prominent personalities, not necessarily those covered by certain types of immunities, as we know of. They are very popular nowadays, regretfully, because, you know, with people can be, heads of states can be impeached because they steal a little few $100s from the state budget, and then they are supposed to be immune for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Where are we in 2025? Certainly not where we were in 1988. And this brings me to one final consideration, and I see Dr. Edges who wants to comment, of course. Unfortunately, we have lost a lot of the traction we had when Juan Mendez was the first special advisor to the Secretary General of the UN, because the Secretary General of the UN was personally committed to never again, because he witnessed Rwanda, couldn't help stopping it, and saw it as the biggest failure of him as a head of peacekeeping, the preventable genocide. And we are now facing so many crises. But I think we need to, you know, we owe it to the victim and to the activists to be hopeful. And I think all the tools that Milena, you highlighted, and let me add one, I believe in all of them all together. Many of them are post-conflict, of course, but also these March sanctions that were imposed, that are not being removed. Am I correct? This is still binding for the US. And there is a willingness in Congress, Matthew told us before, but hopefully also in the administration, to continue to look into these persons or entities as sanctioned. And as Niemat told us, others told us before, Dr. Yaslam too, the entire gold sector, vis-a-vis a major, Dubai is a major port, Fly Emirates, and so on. It's a major hub for business, for entertainment, for sports. Can't we do anything about it? Can't we change that narrative? Can't we make it more difficult for these countries to be in total impunity using the logo of their nation state to, on one side, be a proxy utilize the RSF and other groups to commit atrocities, on the other, invest billions in our economies? Can't we make it more costly for that to happen? So I think we can use those sanctions, and there is certainly a committee at the UN in charge of it. Certainly the Russian side now switched from the RSF, because the Africa Corps now is on the side of the Sudanese armed forces. They do it for the money. They're like mercenaries. So they're ready to go with the winner of the moment, at least in Khartoum. So I think we have a responsibility. I speak here as a European Union citizen. I would like to see the European Union sanctions regime be applied thoroughly on this. Certainly, Italy entered into a multi-billion investment agreement, foreign direct investment, with the UAE. So I'm probably from the wrong, I hold the wrong passport. But I think that a lot of work needs to be done to make these violations as costly as possible, because these people, they want to be in the global markets. And they're certainly hit by phenomena like tariffs, but I think they should also be hit by other measures more targeted towards making these atrocity crimes less profitable. Matthew.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. I had to just quickly intervene because since my release, I've pursued a civil case in the UK. And I also have a criminal case. We've tried to open several criminal cases in different countries because one of the individuals responsible is the president of Interpol. He also has he's the Inspector General of the UAE Ministry of Interior. And we have a criminal case open against him in France. Now, France ruled that President Assad, as head of state, doesn't have immunity.
When he was head of state, it happened at the appeals court, yes.
And so I do some advocacy work with Redress and some other NGOs, and there is actually growing maybe confidence or positivity towards the fact that this occurred. And I think when we spoke in Geneva a couple of months ago during the Human Rights Committee, maybe if you break down some of the UAE's supply, the military operations that provide weapons, that provide men, that provide the export of gold, if they use certain, you could look to break down, say, secondary sanctions. What airports, what logistics companies, who owns these logistic companies, who owns these airports? If they're also profiting from the transfer of these goods, while also, as you said, looking at, say, the military personnel, they may not be directly involved in the day-to-day operations of Sudan, but if they oversee the broader structure, such as it's called the Joint Aviation Logistics, these are military personnel who, as you said, will be traveling, and they will all say that they have diplomatic immunity because they'll be traveling on diplomatic passports. But if courts are increasingly saying, well, actually, hold on, in a criminal case, there is little, or your immunity does not matter. So I think there actually is growing opportunity for this. Sorry.
Thank you for that more optimistic note, and it's actually great to know that you are pursuing both the civil and criminal case, and that there are prospects out there. I am conscious of the fact that we have 5 minutes before the end of our time together, and I wonder if we could at least get 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I have Nimet. Please feel free to. I see your hand up. So please feel free to add your comment.
Yeah, I will be very brief. One point I wanted to mention, I think referenced by Professor Hamilton, about landless. I just corrected the word landless, that these are Arab nomads. They do have land, but they invite their friends and relatives from Chad, Central African Republic, which make it multinational troops. So we try to be very conscious about this narrative, because al-Bashir created the narrative to make Janjaweed look like victims because they do not have land. So that has been spread, actually, including it documented in one of the UN documents. So I just wanted to note that. And the second point I wanted to raise, I may also disagree with our last speaker in regard to the ICC. I do think, yes, most countries may not need ICC, especially those who have independent national judiciary system, as ICC work on the basis of complementarity. In Sudan, we do need the ICC, and I think currently the international community may not have appetite to create the International Tribunal, and many of you who are with a legal background can correct me, because the ICC was created because those ad hoc court did not work in a sustainable manner, and we don't need to create an international court for independent each country or each crisis, because in the presence of the ICC. Of course, ICC is pretty young as an institution. It has a lot. The UN has a lot of problems, but we don't say now UN is not effective, because we want to improve it. And that within that context, I think we do need the court. And for us in Sudan, the ICC indictment of al-Bashir has not brought justice, but it has established the foundation for the Sudanese people. And I think Mutassim and Yazlam, Dr. Yazlam can correct me, because it has created the context of accountability, because we have had historical grievances that no president, no high-level official will be held accountable. And that has changed right now. Everyone wants accountability. Are we ready to pursue that independent accountability? No, we are not like in Syria. So we still do need that court. But what needs to be improved? Independently, accountability alone cannot resolve. And I think long-term transitional justice is needed, but also other aspects like accountability, such as financial accountability, is also needed. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the clarification and the enthusiastic advocacy, which I share. So I do want to turn to the audience in the room to see if there's at least 1 or 2 questions we can take. Or if not, I know we have folks online. I don't know
I think Niemat was the only one who wanted to comment on. Okay. Professor Klamber, yes.
Yeah, I can add. I mean, it's maybe not of direct relevance for the events that you're. I speak here. Yeah. I'm not sure it works. Okay. So because I think it was Professor Stereo that mentioned universal jurisdictions. Professor Stereo mentioned universal jurisdictions. So there's an ongoing trial now at Stockholm District Court relating to Sudan. It doesn't concern the same events that we've been speaking about today, but it's still an example how you can do universal jurisdiction cases. I mean, the two defendants are in court, and justice will be in a sense done. So it can happen.
If I can I'll be very brief. So Niamat, just to address your comment, I think you and I are actually in agreement. I wasn't trying to argue against the ICC. I wasn't trying to argue that the ICC is not needed. I'm just skeptical as to its actual ability to carry out arrest warrants, to actually have defendants in custody, to actually impose a measure of accountability. So I wouldn't discard the ICC. I think it should keep doing what it's doing. I think it should be doing more than it's doing. But you know, I was just being a little bit more skeptical about its actual ability to be effective there. But I definitely think we need it.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on first the issue of sanctions. I really think that there is like a serious question regarding the sanctions imposition. We've been working on this space for quite some time. And I do think that jurisdictions like the United States, United Kingdom, the EU, Canada, and other jurisdictions that have sanctions regime should listen to civil society groups. Oftentimes, when we make sanctions recommendations, you know, we have solid information about entities or individuals, right? Especially in this case, entities. And so by the time sanctions are imposed, the targets already liquidate their companies. And so they, you know, they make the sanctions ineffective. And so that's number one. In terms of accountability, I do think that I share with you a point that the ICC is crucially important, but I'm really skeptical in a sense that, you know, with all the, you know, the dynamics that we've seen now with the ICC and the difficulty investigating new cases and issuing arrest warrants and the like, I do think that we need to think beyond what the ICC can do. And I think for our purposes, I think it is crucial to hold states and entities accountable first to arrest the conflict, right? This is number one. And number two, to the issue of justice and accountability, I really do think that given the widespread violation across the entire country in Sudan, and the many perpetrators involved, I don't think the ICC will have the capacity to bring justice to victims in Sudan. And I think the way I say justice is when the victims are satisfied with the process and with the prosecution and the like, and that cannot happen at the ICC alone. I do think that the whole justice process should occur when victims themselves can participate in the process. That in a way will remedy and redress their many decades grievances.
I think that's such an important reminder that we talk about the ICC, but it is one small piece in this architecture of justice, broadly speaking. And so many of the options can be pursued simultaneously and should be pursued simultaneously that we've talked about. I don't know, David, if you have any, oh, was there?
Dr. Yaslam.
Dr. Yaslam, please, go ahead.
To reiterate a couple of very important points that's mentioned by my colleagues here. For the ICC is not enough. Yes, because there is a lot of people involved in these atrocities in Sudan who live in the West, for example, in America, like what Namat mentioned earlier, who live in the UK, in the Netherlands, in the USA, and they actually calling shots. They're really active people in the crimes committed in Sudan, but there is no action taken against these people. So these people are valuable there in the West, but still no action is taken against them. Another thing is critical as well, is actually the dire need for assistance for the Sudanese people themselves. Most of the discussion internationally is about the parties involved in the war, but the people themselves is being forgotten. like lifting the sanctions, which is on the Sudanese people, the international sanctions, either by the United Nations or by the United States, and so on. These actually is damaging the people right now. Even providing aid to them, it makes it difficult as well. Regarding the sanctions on the UAE, for example, what Dr. Matthew mentioned, there need to be a kind of a movement to hold countries like the UAE accountable by pinpointing, like what you said, the UAE is a hub. A sanction on this hub itself, that the people just stop going to the UAE for holidays, to show solidarity for the victims, either in Yemen, in Sudan, and it's not just that, in other places as well. We don't forget about people in Congo, people in Syria, which is recovering now, hopefully. All these places, you find fingers of the UAE in it. So the international community need to be involved as a whole, not just ICC or ICJ or by itself. That's what I need to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are done, but we are not done, because this means that we are starting a lot of work. We are planning, of course, to put together some sort of summary, but what I like to do normally is a list of action points, and there is so much to be done. Certainly, HOPE should not cease to support our work, because things change on the ground. If maybe one small thing can be added from my side is that would be very important that all these entities that we mentioned, including the ICC, which I know is very controversial nowadays, especially in certain parts of the world, but I think it is very important that they coordinate with each other. Because, for example, smart sanctions like assets, freezing assets, fine, but travel bans, why? We want these people to travel so that we can arrest them. Yeah. Am I right? So why don't we have smarter sanctions and have courts and tribunals, even at the domestic level, when they exercise jurisdiction, like in Europe or in Argentina or in other countries, to coordinate with the UN Sanctions Committee? And of course, the problem is that the UN Sanctions Committee is not so effective, it's blocked by vetoes and so on. So a lot of work to be done. And again, a great thank you for all those who stayed and traveled to come here, or have stayed for so long and have connected with us. This will be available online, so there will be, it will be a starting point to do much more in the future. Thank you.